King me, king me, king me. That's what I used to say when I was winning at checkers. Why do I bring this up? Oh, because we're making a checkerboard block today. Let's get started. So here is my sample block that I made, and as you can kind of see, it just looks like a checkerboard, hence the name checkerboard block. What's impressive about this block is not the design of the block, it's the technique that I used to make the block. Now for a while, quilters have actually come up with this technique where you create some kind of a quilt block, then you cut it up a certain way, then you re-sew it back. Hey, we're quilters, that's what we do. So in this week's block, it's not the block itself that's impressive. What I really want to drive home is the technique as to how I made this block. So here's how I did it. I actually used 4 5-inch squares. Now, in my sample, I just used 2 of this dark blue print and 2 of this white. But the block that I'm gonna make with all of you, I'm gonna use 4 different print fabrics just to see what happens when I do that. So let's get started making our checkerboard block, quilt block. So to start our block, we're gonna sew a 4 patch with all of these 4 printed squares. So let's start sewing our block. So here we have our basic 4 patch block sewn together, and I'm going to actually spin that center seam. So I'm going to take my seam ripper, take jack, and what I'm doing is, here is the last seam that I just sewn, and right in that seam allowance, I'm going to take my seam ripper, take jack, and I am just going to pluck those stitches right out, just so that I can actually loosen up the fabric. And I'm only going up to where that last seam is. So I'm plucking all of that out, and I got that one. Turn it over, and we are gonna take this one out. There it is. Now I can actually take the fabric, and I'm gonna press this seam over downwards, press this seam over upwards, and in the middle, in that seam allowance, I'm just gonna take out those last few stitches. And what this is a technique called spinning the seam. And what it does is it sort of distributes the bulk here in the seam allowance so that not everything is laying onto one side. Otherwise, you could potentially have 8 layers of fabric in one single spot. So you could very well press the seams open as well. That kind of has the same effect, but I like spinning the seams actually. So we got our 4 patch. Let's press this block before we continue. So here is our 4 patch block, all nicely pressed, and our 4 patch should measure around 9.5 inches, of course give or take your 1/4 inch seam allowance. If you want to square it up to 9.5 inches, go ahead and do so, but at this point it's not gonna really matter so much, so long as it's not way off. Okay. But this is where it gets a little bit interesting, because what we're gonna do is we're gonna cut up this 4 patch, we're gonna swap the pieces around, and we're gonna sew it back together. So let's do that. Now when we started, each of these 4 squares was 5 inches in size. So 5 inches divided by 2, that's 2.5. So what we're gonna do is we're actually gonna cut these in half, both vertically and horizontally on all 4 sides. You can measure 2.5 inches from the edge and then make your cut, or you can measure from the center seam 2 1/4. Now, why 2 1/4? Well, because there's a 1/4 inch seam allowance hidden behind here. If you're gonna measure it from the center, you're gonna measure it from 2 1/4, but if you're gonna measure it from the edges, you take 2 1/2. I'm gonna do it actually from the center. So what I'm doing is, this ruler's not quite big enough, but I'm gonna use it anyway. And I'm taking my 2 1/4 line here. This white line that you see is actually my 2 1/4 inch line. Now there's also another horizontal line here. This circle mark here, that's dead center. So I'm making sure that I'm lining up the 2 1/4 inch line here from the center, as well as making sure that this horizontal line lines up with the seam that's going horizontally. And I'm also taking a look at the fact that this circle is dead center in the middle. So if everything looks good, yep, let's cut it down. Now, a little tip: when your ruler is not quite big enough or not quite long enough to go all the way through, a lot of quilters will do this technique where they'll start on the edge here, pull a little bit back, go back to that starting point, cut it, slide the ruler, and cut the rest. Okay, try not to move your fabric pieces. If they move, just gently realign it. Now we're gonna give a 1/4 turn. Same thing, line it up, and I'm gonna start here, pull it back, whoops, pull it back, start there, and let's cut it all the way through. Lift up the ruler, spin it around. On this particular block, precision's not a big thing. I mean, I'm not the most precise quilter, I'll be honest, but the block should come out perfectly fine. When you're cutting it, or when you're doing this cut, it doesn't have to be perfect. Of course, well, any experienced quilter can kind of know how to manipulate the 1/4 inch seam allowance to kind of make it fit. So don't worry so much about cutting it precisely on this block, because this particular block is very, well, I would say it's very forgiving. That looks a little bit off there, but I'm not going to worry about that. Cut backwards and clip forward, slide the ruler, and we're off to the last side. I'm not going to line up this half of it because these are all cut already, but here was my original center, and there's the original center line there. I just want to make sure that I do grab or line this half of the original 4 patch, and that looks good. So I'm gonna just slice it toward me a little bit, then oh, fabric slid off. Because the fabric shifted on me, I'm just gonna take all of that away for a second, and I can actually just do this. Here's the original middle seam from the 4 patch, and I can just measure 2 1/4 inches from there. Slice that. And so what we have here is we took our original 4 patch and we cut it up into a bunch of 2.5-inch squares. And so now the fun starts. This is where we get to swap. You can just put it in any combination that you want to, just making sure that no two fabrics are next to each other. You can play around with this and have fun with it all night long, but this looks good to me. You know, what's really funny about quilting is the fact that, well, you take a whole bunch of fabric, you cut it up into a million different pieces, arrange it a certain way, only to sew it right back together. Does that really make sense? Not really, but it's what we do as quilters. Cut up the fabric, rearrange it, and put it back together a little bit more decoratively, I would say. One of the more interesting blocks to make is what quilters have called the disappearing patches, or the disappearing blocks. I kind of figured in this 52 weeks, 52 block series, we haven't done much in terms of disappearing blocks. Over the next couple of weeks, we're going to be doing a series of disappearing 4-patch blocks, or perhaps disappearing 9-patch blocks. And hey, we might experiment with other disappearing blocks. Actually, if you think about it, we kind of played around with this particular technique when we did the Tiffany star. Remember when we had the Tiffany, or when we created the Tiffany star, we started out with 4 string blocks and we cut it the same way that we were cutting this checkerboard quilt block, and we added star points just by snowballing the corners. As I've said before, this particular block, I mean, it's not the most exciting block, I will admit, but it's the technique that I wanted to actually demonstrate in terms of, we started off with a 4-patch and then we cut it in half, or we cut it a certain way. We're rearranging the block and we're sewing it back together. Why? Because we're quilters and that's what we do. You cut it, you sew it, you put it back together. That's what we do. Aside from doing that, we also hoard fabric like nobody's business. Don't lie. I know you guys all have a stash that's enough to actually open your own quilt shop. You don't need any more fabric, but do you want more fabric? Yes, you do. And of course, your partner or your husband is probably telling you, you got so much fabric, but you need more. There should be a Fabrics Anonymous. Hi, my name is Eric, and I'm a fabric hoarder. That would be, well, at least we're doing something productive with our addiction rather than something destructive. But hey, I'm not one to judge. So before we sew our checkerboard quilt block together, I figure it might be fun to take a look at the same technique and apply it to a different quilt block. So here we have a pinwheel in which I cut it here and cut it here, as well as basically I just did the same cutting technique. Let's play around with this block and start swapping the pieces around to see what designs we can come up with. Point being, this technique doesn't only work with 4-patch or 9-patch blocks. You can take basically almost any block that you have, cut it up into equal parts and swap the pieces around, turn them around, see what you come up with. Let's get our checkerboard quilt block sewn together and let's get this quilt block done. Have our blocks sewn together, but yeah, there's a lot of bulk back here. So I'm actually going to take the time and actually start spinning each of these seams where they meet. So this will be a good block to practice that spinning technique. Okay. Well, you know, this is week 25. Is it 25? 25 or yeah, I think it's 25. And we're almost halfway done. Actually, we are at the halfway mark. What am I talking about? You know, I never thought that, I thought it was a little ambitious for me to start when I first started this series. I mean, 52 blocks. Wow, that's a lot. And I can't believe that I'm actually doing 52 blocks. In reality, 52 blocks is not all that much, or creating the blocks actually isn't really that difficult to do because there's thousands of quilt blocks that are out there. And you know, maybe this, I mean, I wanted these blocks to be beginner friendly, not overly complicating because, well, if you know me by now, I get easily confused. So just kind of thinking about 25 weeks now, I think we got a good variety of blocks in here. But just looking at all the videos, I mean, the other day I was actually looking at the very first video and ooh, that was just scary. I will say, and not to toot my own horn, but I will say I've come a long way. I mean, I'm not a professional videographer. I'm not even a photographer. I was totally brand new to how to edit a video, how to even put a video together. And I had a huge learning curve. It's been a fun ride, I will say that, or a fun journey, I should say. And I kind of feel like I've come a long way, but I got a lot more to learn. I didn't realize how big of a time commitment it was, or how big of an undertaking I was doing. But I'm glad I'm glad I decided to do it. Otherwise, I wouldn't have met all of you. But as I was reviewing a lot of the videos or past videos, there were some moments that I thought were just kind of thought to myself, what in the world was I thinking? I remember filming at 2 o'clock in the morning and just being absolutely delirious. But you know what? Sometimes those are the best ideas come out of those moments. There were the moments where I was just singing and dancing. What was your favorite moment, or what's your favorite thing about the videos or this whole series? Put a comment down below. Let me know what you like, or dare I say what you don't like about these videos. Okay, I got my seam spun. Let's get this block pressed and let's call it a block, or let's call it a video. Or we're done for this week, I should say. And here is my checkerboard block. Now the block should finish around 8.5 inches, give or take a 1/4 inch seam allowance. In this example, I chose 4 fabrics, 4 different print fabrics, and this is the end result of that. If you want the actual checkerboard look, what you can do is choose 2 print fabrics of 5-inch squares and 2 background of 5-inch squares. I wanted to experiment with different prints, so this is what I came up with. Well, that's it for this video. I hope you enjoyed learning how to make a checkerboard block, and go out there and have fun using this technique on other blocks. Well, I showed you the pinwheel. Try it on maybe an hourglass, or try it on a star block. Who knows what you can come up with. Well, that's it. Now go out and have fun and create something. Thanks for watching. If you like this video, hit the thumbs up and subscribe to the channel. Hit the bell for notifications on when I upload the next video. Put a comment down below saying what you liked, or maybe even what you didn't like. And join the Facebook discussion group at Treasure Heart Creations. You can post pictures of the blocks that you created, or just scroll through and gather inspiration from other Treasure Heart Creation Group members. And from time to time, there are giveaways exclusively for Treasure Heart Creation Group members. So use the link in the description box below to sign up. If you're on Instagram, post pictures of the blocks that you're working on using the hashtag THC5252. Well, that's it for now. Now go out and create something.